Keeping up with the anime metagame has always been a daunting task. Anime's developers work round the clock to bring us new content updates every 3 months, and it's not unusual to see one new mechanic or strategy become absolutely dominant in one patch, only for everyone to completely forget about it when the next one rolls around. If a build is really OP or popular, it can stick around for a patch or two before fading into obscurity, and sometimes a good legacy build can even make a comeback years later if some new content supports it, but the power creep in this game is real. Attack on Titan was the SS tier build of 2013. Nothing else could touch it, not even adding moe and fan service to the revamped Gurren Lagann build. Yet despite getting a huge buff in the spring 2017 patch with a boost to its stat line, new abilities, and the English simuldub on TV EXP bonus, it just couldn't generate buzz from players like it used to, or even sustain their interest through the next patch. The Hiroaka Season 2 build may not have been quite as popular initially, but a longer cycle of support kept it relevant through the summer patch, and it's only looking to become more overpowered with the update that's been teased for spring 2018. With the metagame being so volatile, it at times seems close to impossible to create a solid anti-meta build to consistently counter it. Predicting what will be dominant even a few months down the line is tricky enough, and without a thorough understanding of what you're playing against and how to counter it, an anti-meta anime build can easily just become a shittier copy of whatever it's built to beat. However, exploiting weak points in degenerate strategies can be fun and effective if done correctly. Just look at how the ReZero build shook up the isekai meta. And in the last year, we've seen some really interesting counter strategies emerge, some much more effective than others. Today, I'd like to take a look at the past year and the current state of the anime meta, see what works and what doesn't, and based on that, see if we can't figure out what counter-strats will be effective in the future. The winter 2017 meta gave us a rare chance to see an anti-meta build at the top of the tier list. Back in 2016, you may remember, Konosuba's isekai parody tech proved to be particularly effective against the degenerate brain-dead otaku pandering strats of the B-tier Gate, and the strong yet predictable edgy Grimdark kit of Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash. But beyond having strong counterplay options against two of the most popular builds of that season, the consistency provided by the Konosuba build's surprisingly OP, lovable characters and actually funny writing sub-skills allowed it to win over builds it wasn't even designed to counter. The only force in that meta that could beat it was Erased, which came out of left field with its dark plot and emotionally resonant storytelling skills maxed out. Although that build's longevity was ultimately hurt because it didn't put enough EXP into its ending skill tree. And ultimately, it was the ReZero build in the following patch that used the best parts of both strategies to dominate the 2016 meta, but now I'm really digressing from this anti-meta discussion. In the winter 2017 patch, the Konosuba build didn't have to compete with anything as unexpectedly OP as Erased, and buffs to its versatile cast of characters and comedic animation abilities allowed it to remain effective despite there not being any terrible isekai builds in the meta for it to counter until summer. When the spring patch rolled out, the consistent power of shonen action mechanics put the Attack on Titan and Hiroaka legacy builds at the top of the meta. But right below them, we saw a trifecta of new A-tier anti-meta anime. At the bottom of the pile was the Recreators build, which I personally had the most fun with out of anything this year. It had plays against everything: Battle Royale builds, Magical Girl builds, Isekai builds, you name it. Plus, it got a serious power boost from its Battle Sakuga and Sawano drop equipment synergy. Its core strategy played with the underlying mechanics of the anime game engine itself, and there's seemingly bottomless depth in its commentary on the creative process and nihilistic philosophy skill sets. And the power level of its secret recap episode skill is off the charts. But with that depth comes a lot of perceived jank that turned many players off. You definitely need to have a lot of patience and the right mindset to get the most out of the recreator's build, so I can understand why it wasn't as popular as some others this year. I'm working on a strategy guide for some of its deeper mechanics and concepts right now, but I don't want to spoil that just yet, so let's move on to the other spring patch builds. Eromanga Sensei and Akashic Records were designed as counters to Emoto Fetish and Magical High School type builds respectively, with both making use of the exaggerated trope skill for a loose approximation of the parody mechanics we saw in the Konosuba build. Eromanga Sensei augmented this with the lots of anime references subskill as well to make up for its weak actually original joke stat. Now I say counter with big air quotes around it because ultimately both of these builds ended up playing almost identically to the old meta builds they were supposedly designed to beat. Akashic Records' stripper outfit Seifuku and absurdly lazy yet OP protagonist skills are really just slightly more powerful variants of the standard spank bank material and wish fulfillment skills that we see in other magical school builds. And it's honestly almost impossible to differentiate a standard Eromanga Sensei match from old footage of 2010's Oreimo build in action, especially when the new build reuses the old one's assets for certain attacks. After the summer patch, those two became largely irrelevant, and though recreators still saw play, we didn't really see any strong anti-meta builds emerge to replace them, and none of the new additions to the standard meta came anywhere close to beating Hiroaka. That said, two of the top A-tier builds did incorporate some counterplay mechanics. Made in Abyss incorporated the actually it's a horror series skill into its kids adventure story build, a strat that worked well for Madoka Magica and now and then here and there way back in the day, and gamers had a strong impact in the early game with its psych this isn't really a club show ability, but both builds ultimately focused on doing their own thing rather than countering other strategies. Way down on the tier list, we do find one surprisingly fun anti-meta build that's unfortunately not seeing much play, mostly because it was built to counter a meta from more than 2 decades ago. Mahojin Guru Guru relies heavily on the classic fantasy RPG anime parody skill set, and it's one of the best builds I've ever seen at utilizing it, right up there with the legendary Slayers build, but it's kinda wasted in a meta where nothing relevant really uses the mechanics that it's designed to counter. Underneath its anti-meta kit, Mahojin Guru Guru has a lot of the same general versatility as Konosuba, albeit in a more kid-friendly package, so if you liked that build, I recommend giving Guru Guru a try while it's still getting patch updates. I think it has a lot of potential that hasn't been fully exploited in the meme arena. That brings us to the fall patch and the current anime meta. 10 weeks in, we're still not seeing any strategies really dominate, but interestingly, there are quite a few anti-meta strategies being played right now. The most popular of these is probably Black Clover, which was designed to copy the strats of the ever-popular Boruto's Dad build, but its stat distribution is just so wonky that it ends up playing more effectively with the ironic watch or unintentional parody equipment sets. The Blend S build is interesting in that it's designed to counter widely used character archetype skills rather than any specific genre builds. Tying those counter mechanics to a standard workplace comedy build allows Blend S to use them in a variety of scenarios, making it a lot more versatile and fun to play than it might first appear. In particular, its core skill, the sadistic waitress is actually just bad at her job, works surprisingly well no matter how many times it's spammed in a match, and the support skills, the tsundere is just a geek who wants friends, and romantic tension with the manager allows the build's stronger points to really shine. And we can't ignore the overwhelming power of its exploitable opening theme subskill in the meme PvP arena either. I have a feeling that if it gets a legacy update in a future patch, Blend S could have the same enduring appeal as the similar working build. Far less effective is the A Little Sister's All You Need build, which is just a mess across the board. It can't decide whether it wants to counter or utilize the trashy light novel skill set, and thus ends up doing neither very effectively. It does have a surprisingly strong emotional theme of longing ability, but it's on a ridiculously long cooldown, so it only sees maybe one use per round, and the build spends most of its time endlessly spamming its scene of characters sitting around a table and gross most sexual humor abilities instead. At the bottom of the fall patch tier list, things get a bit more interesting with the sadly underplayed support build, Anime Guitaris. The build's gameplay is a little bit janky, but the way that it boosts other builds with its love letter to worldwide otaku culture and thinly veiled allusions to popular shows abilities is unique and surprisingly engaging. Anime Guitaris is definitely a build designed with the most hardcore of hardcore anime players in mind, as its power relies on familiarity with the strats of dozens of other builds. But if your power level is high enough, it's another build that's not getting enough love. On that note, no discussion of the anime metagame would be complete without discussing the reigning king of anti-meta builds, Gintama. Gintama builds have remained a constant presence in the anime meta, ever since the original was introduced in the spring 2006 patch in order to counter the years-long game-breaking dominance of the big three builds Boruto's Dad, Bleach, and One Piece, which was released earlier and proved to be a lot more popular on Japanese servers than it was in the West, prior to them updating the servers simultaneously worldwide. Although Gintama's skill set was originally designed solely to counter those builds, as well as the legacy Dragon Ball Z build that they were all based on, its meta jokes about anime production ability gives it a lot of versatility beyond that. It is far and away the most supported anti-meta build in the game, and new updates have allowed it to keep pace with many other popular strategies. At this point, there's barely anything relevant in the game that hasn't been countered by one Gintama iteration or another. But that massive legacy makes it a bit challenging for new players to get into. Because of Gintama's continuity skill tree, you essentially need to grind through hundreds of hours of old content in order to maximize the effectiveness of its current builds. As such, it's mostly just played by longtime devotees, who swear by it, mind you, but for the rest of us, the closest we can really get to properly playing it is watching clips and highlights from their games. The Osomatsu-san build was designed to solve this problem by removing the continuity system almost entirely while retaining the same core strengths as Gintama, but it hasn't gained as much traction outside of the Fujoshi Guild. Although to its credit, those who do play it do so almost religiously. And those are all of the anti-meta builds that were relevant in 2017. Which leads us to answer one final question. What comes next for the game of anime? The fall patch's Ancient Magus Bride build looks like it's at least going to stay relevant through the coming winter meta, where it will be competing with a lot of revived legacy builds, as well as the much anticipated Violet Evergarden, which closed beta players are reporting is insanely overpowered. An anti-meta build utilizing fantasy parody mechanics could do really well in such a metagame, but none of the developer announcements so far have even teased anything like that, and there's no sign of another Konosuba update anytime soon. New content for the Psyche K build should at least satisfy anti-meta players, but I don't expect to see it or anything else like it really dominate the next patch. Moving on to spring 2018, I do see a lot of potential in the Wotaku ni Koi wa Muzukashi build, which plans to hit a sweet spot between Fujoshi players and male otaku, but it remains to be seen whether it can deliver on that promise and please either of those groups. After that, not a lot has been announced or even teased, but we can be fairly certain that Gintama will remain relevant in the meta no matter what. Of course, the big anti-meta news of the year is the return of the insanely powerful One Punch Man build that absolutely destroyed everything else in 2015 with its 1-2 punch, ironically, of superhero parody and shonen battle parody skills. The new One Punch Man update doesn't yet have a solid release date beyond sometime next year, and changes under the hood, such as a shift in subclass from Madhouse to JC staff, have some players worried that it won't be the same build that we remember, but even the skeptics among us are still eager to see what we'll get from this new update, whenever we get it, that is. With any luck, it'll still be strong enough to hold its own against the increasingly powerful My Hero Academia. It'll be really interesting to see a meta where both of those builds are active at once. What do you guys think? What are you anticipating in the upcoming 2018 patches? And on the subject of meta anime, would you rather see me analyze the OP skills of Blend S or Anime Guitaris next? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell for more analysis of and strategies for the anime metagame every single week. And if you want to support me in what I do, consider heading over to patreon.com/mothersbasement like the fine folks you're seeing on screen right now. If you do, you'll gain access to a special patrons-only Discord, and you can even have your name featured at the end of Mother's Basement videos. Speaking of my videos, if you want to see a different discussion of game design in anime, click here to see me break down why I think Made in Abyss was originally supposed to be a video game, or click here for my analysis of the opening to Recovery of an MMO Junkie. And click here for my podcast, The Weebcast. If this is the last I see of you today, I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.